There's an implied promise when you buy a published adventure. The publisher is saying, hey, you could design a whole campaign from scratch. You could make your own encounters. You could plot out a whole adventure 1 week at a time. But if you buy this book, you don't have to. That promise might be true for a lot of people. It's not true for me. I'm Skylar, the Dungeonologist. This is D&D with ADHD. When Princes of the Apocalypse came out, it was described to me as a reactive, multi-faction sandbox that I could run out of the box, as it were, without much prep. I'm sure that's how it went for the friend who told me that. 20 pages and several thousand words later, I hadn't found what I needed. It felt like I was reading a textbook. Not the adventure's fault. I like this adventure. I just couldn't pay attention to the material. There was no illuminated path for me to follow. Finally, I had found the starting town, and it was another 20 pages before I found out what happens in the first session. There were so many details about each faction's lore and leadership, about individuals in the starting town of Red Larch, and none of it said, hey, here's what happens when the party gets to town. And that's what I needed. I was emotionally drained. My excitement for the adventure was gone. I was frustrated that the $50 I had spent on the book wasn't enough to bridge the gap between seeing the text and absorbing the information. This happens to me all the time. I sit down, I flip through the book, and there's no clear set of steps to follow. I get frustrated by the buried lead, and I say, screw it, I'll just write my own crap from scratch. It happens so often that the first place I go when I see a new adventure book is the magic items section, because it's something cool that I can use right away. In high school, when I had unlimited free time and few responsibilities, which I absolutely took for granted, I could sit and brute force my way through an adventure book, again and again until I'd actually absorbed the information. I could spend agonizing minutes at the table flipping through the text for the first time, to my player's chagrin. Now, I need my time to count. I need every minute of work I use to prep the game to be spent preparing for the game. I'm not going to critique adventure writing in this video, although I do plan on uploading something like that in the future. I'm just going to give you the tools that I use to run the game from pre-published sources without having to slog through 200 plus pages of text. So, I took another crack at Princes of the Apocalypse. The very first thing I need when I prep from a published adventure is a staging area, a place to put the important stuff. Scratch paper, index cards, a journal, anything you can write on and take with you. I personally use the bullet journal format, and there are plenty of resources on how to set that up from people who are better informed than I am. I'll put those links in the description. Next, I open the book. All you actually need for session 1 is your bad guys, your starting town, and your first dungeon. Princes of the Apocalypse is full of good guy and bad guy factions. There are 4 evil cults, so I look for where the villains are. In the Wizards of the Coast books, they're usually in the back. I wish it was front-loaded, but I find out who they are, what they want, and who works for them. Copying an abridged version of each monster stat block that I'll need is a good way to familiarize myself with their abilities and limitations. If you don't want to do that, it's fine to just have that on hand as a resource at the table and look at the monsters as you go. On page 20, I have my starting town, Red Larch. There are 21 hooks and a buttload of rumors to give the players to kind of seed the adventure, but I just pick a few that I think my players will respond to and don't worry about the rest. A picture of the town map on my phone or printed out is something that's always helpful to me for whatever questions the players have about the taverns or the blacksmith or whatever they think should be available in Red Larch. If it seems like you need a ton of NPCs to make the town run smoothly, session 1, a spreadsheet or some graph paper with names and brief descriptions is enough to get you started. Another 20 pages past Red Larch, and we have our first dungeon, although it's technically a tower, Feathergale's Spire. Because I wrote my bad guys down earlier, I basically already know what these evil knights want and who they work for. I always redraw the dungeon to scale on graph paper, A, because it helps me visualize how the rooms are oriented and connected, and B, so I want to flip back and forth through the dungeon section of the book while we're all at the table. Once you get to this part, reading it gets way easier. Many people familiar with the hobby know that you don't need to read an adventure or any D&D book front to back. But if you don't have a plan of attack, that can seem like the only recourse. Reframing the task is how I overcome it. Instead of slogging through hundreds of pages, trying to absorb every detail, it's a brief scavenger hunt for a few key things. Instead of a confusing textbook full of unnecessary lore and tables, you have a resource to draw on if you feel like you need it. These reframing techniques are things that you'll find in cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, and that's something that I use every single day, not just in D&D, It's a resource that I'll link to in the description as well. Now that you have a concrete starting point, your bad guys, your starting town, and your dungeon, you can treat the adventure book like a reference manual, which it is. Thank you for watching. I hope that this was helpful. If there are obstacles that stand between you and the game that you want to run, whether they're rooted in ADHD or not, let me know in the comments. If you know someone who is afraid to run the game because they have a mental disorder or they just feel they're not equal to the task of DMing, consider showing them this channel.